Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final instalment of the Westmead Research Hub Commercialisation Seminar Series. Today, we're fortunate enough to have Gabriel presenting. He's an investment associate at One Ventures, which is one of Australia's premier life sciences and medical technology investment funds. Gabriel joined One Ventures after completing his MBA at the Australian Graduate School of Management at UNSW. And before moving to Australia, he worked as a specialty sales representative for both Shire Pharmaceuticals and Paladin Laboratories in Montreal, in areas ranging across allergy immunotherapies, antibiotics, right through to psychiatry. More recently, he was the program manager at Cicada Innovations for their New South Wales Health-sponsored medical device commercialisation training program, which many of you may have heard of. And over the course of his 3 years there, the program led to the creation of 11 medtech companies, raising a total of close to 25 million in funding. So very impressive. So I'm excited to have everyone here today to hear Gabriel talk. Just a note to our viewers that there will be a question and answer function on the top right of your screen. So please ask questions as they reside, and he will do his best to answer them as he goes. So I'll now invite Gabriel to share his screen and begin his presentation. Thank you.
All right, so thank you everyone, and thanks to David Cardoso and James Linton for having me, as part of the Westmead Hub webinar series. So yeah, I got to know David, over the course of the past year. So it's great to kind of foster that relationship with the Westmead Hub. For us as investors, obviously, this is the key. It's being in touch with the innovators in Australia that are developing new life science technologies, both medtech, digital health, and biopharma. So that we get to work with people, early on and help them shape the commercialization of their discoveries. So today I'll really aim to give you all a sense of, how do investors specifically, and private investors such as ourselves and venture capital look at opportunities that come to us for investment, and how we build a relationship with discovery teams from the very start, all the way through commercialization and transactions, and that discoveries might entail. Basically, just to get the best, obviously, scientific success for the technology, and obviously the commercial windfalls that come from it. So I think before I start, I'll obviously do a bit of a shameless plug and tell you a bit more about One Ventures, which has a similar structure to other life science funds in Australia. So we kind of all benefit from this, largely from the same source of capital. So I think the structure of our fund is actually being informative for you to understand how other venture capital firms function. So look, we're a particular nuance of a VC in the sense that we invest in both life sciences and technology, which actually has served us well, especially as the healthcare in the past, especially in the past 18 months, has transitioned more to a digital space. So the fund was founded back in 2010, and with the three founders, Anne-Marie Burkle, Michelle Deaker, and Paul Kelly, their DNA really is reflected in the firm, where Michelle came from an IT background, Anne-Marie came from an incubator accelerator background and tech transfer from by working at the University of Queensland, and Paul is an endocrinologist by training, so a physician and an operator. He was CEO of two NASDAQ listed companies in the genomic space, and worked both in the UK and the US. So we have a really good mix of skill set from our founders that then permeates into how our firm invests. Currently, we have $400 million Aussie under management, and this is by raising 5 funds now. The first fund was raised in 2010, hybrid tech and life science, and now Fund 5 is actually an equity fund that invests in technology, but actually the first investment was in Lumery, which is actually an NDIS management platform for both providers and clients. So there's that healthcare bend to it. I think the important thing to know as well is, as I talk about our funds, when I say equity, I specify equity because some funds are also debt funds, which means that some funds can actually lend you money as opposed to give you cash for shares. So that's an interesting model where you're near commercialization or have some, potentially companies have existing revenues from other sources and want to support a new discovery program. They don't need to, issue shares to get that money. There's actually a potential for healthcare firms as well to borrow money, which less relevant for this stage, but that is something that's an option for you in the future. Currently, we have 21 active portfolio companies. We're based in both Sydney and Brisbane, and more recently, actually, in Melbourne, with Ginny Joffin joining our healthcare team in Melbourne. And I'll just move this on, that's in the way. Essentially, our money, which is important to know from a VC firm when you research them, is where does the money come from? So in our case, it's actually backed by hundreds of high net worth individuals throughout Australia, which have a combined worth of above $20 billion. And obviously have allocated money to this strategy, i.e. investing in healthcare and early stage tech. But we're also backed by the federal government with our Healthcare Fund 3, which is the one that's actively investing in healthcare right now. And that's important to know because actually that makes it so that the investment that we make out of Fund 3 need to be Australian based. And that means two things. Either the technology comes from Australia, from an Australian university such as UCID or even the Westmead Hub, so an institution based in Australia, or it could be a company from abroad, but that it will do significant work in Australia. So it could be clinical trials, it could be manufacturing for a biologic, for example, or a med tech device. So we do have a quite an Australian bend via the BTF fund, which is also managed by Brendan Capital Partners, as well as bioscience managers who have also tapped into the 250 million that was made available by the government in 2016. So that gives you a bit of a landscape of where the money comes from, our funds I've talked about. And in all likelihood, and I was telling David and James this, from our perspective, we are planning to raise Fund 6, which will be healthcare specific. So it's very relevant for us to start building relationships now. As I walk through our current investment criteria, you might find that, we're maybe a bit later stage than something coming out of the lab would be. But we do build relationships early on because we need to, find our next pipeline of investment. Like a pharma company has a pipeline of products. We have to have a pipeline of companies that we're supporting, and earlier in the fund we are, which is another aspect that you need to think about when you're going after VC money, is that we have a fund horizon, which means that if we raise money in 2016, for example, we need to return capital to our investors in 2026, right? But the earlier on we are and that kind of capital allocation and return journey, then the earlier we can actually make the investment. So we could invest in a discovery program or one that has just secured a lead molecule, for example, and starting animal trials if we're earlier on in that 10-year period. If you're going after a fund that is in the 5th or 6th year of their fund, which is our case now, you might want to be closer to clinical, right? So yeah, you want to have to do a bit of research to find out how do you position yourself relative to the fund life. This is just to give you an idea of the types of companies that we've invested in. The ones that I'll talk into more detail today are Cura Biotech, which is a biologics, so a monoclonal antibody out of UQ and the University of Sydney, being developed at the NZAC Research Institute out near the Concord Hospital. And yeah, so that was, you'll see the founders there, Georgina Clark and Derek Hart. That's very much an Australian story. And Bivacor as well, to give you a bit of a sense on the medical device space. So Total Artificial Heart out of the Queensland University of Technology, invented by Daniel Timms, the now founder and CEO of the company, who's now based in the US, but yeah, the technology was developed here. So this is again specific to Fund 3, so for One Ventures, but this is the kind of information, as I touched on, that you would want to find out about a fund as you go to them, right? So for Fund 3, we have $170 million that we can invest out of the fund. as I talked about, this is the fund horizon. The ticket size, right? So how much money a particular fund is looking to deploy, right? So we're looking to deploy between 10 to $25 million Aussie per company. I should specify this is over the lifetime of the company, so not necessarily in the first round, but between our first investment and exiting the company by having it acquired, or having some kind of liquidity event such as potentially an IPO. This is how much capital we want to deploy. And just to give you a sense, the reason we come to that number is essentially if you divide 170 by 10 to 25, you're getting to a number of portfolio companies within that fund, and that's manageable, right? Because we're pretty hands-on. We have to sit on boards of those companies. We want to keep a close eye on them, help them make decisions, etc. So we're very much to the strategy of not, basically a shotgun approach where we're making small investment in many companies, tens of them, which, some funds have that strategy. For us, it's really, to be hands-on, to be on the board of the companies, help them strategically. And we find that this gives us, the, 10 or so portfolio companies that we think we can really add value. More than that, with the size of our team, we'd be spread thin, right? So that's something you want to understand, because as you present your investment case to companies, and we'll get down to some detail, but you want to say, okay, we know you guys want to put 10 to 25. Here's the plan that we're putting forward. So potentially a $10 million round where we're looking with 2 investors that you can contribute to now, but we know that we'll need to then raise, after, for example, we complete some preclinical animal trials, or we get to the phase 1 healthy volunteer study, but we know we'll need more money and a patient study with a phase 2 to really get an exit in the particular indication that we're getting into, i.e. an IPO or an acquisition. Here's the plan, right? So we believe that given your investment mandate, our capital requirements will fit your fund timeline and the amount of money you want to deploy. So that's very key. And to be honest, not a lot of companies give us that kind of capital deployment that fits our mandate. But if you have that in your presentation, I can guarantee you're going to be leaps and bounds above most companies. Obviously, we still have to like the technology, but that will really show a level of professionalism and give us confidence in the team. And it's nothing that's so hard to do, right? I mean, you can get this. I mean, take it down for today. I think Fund 6 might have something similar. So if you come with that angle to one ventures in the future, yeah, it will really set you apart. As I talked about the Australian eligibility for this Fund 3, Fund 6 probably won't have those geographical requirements, but again, helpful to know. And ESV-CLP, that's something you might come across with other funds in Australia. Essentially what this scheme is from the federal government is that if you can show that you're commercializing your tech here in Australia, there's a setup with the ATO, so the Australian Tax Office, that will actually encourage local investors to invest in your company. And if there's any capital gains, right, if they make profits in the future from their investment, they'll actually be, the capital gains tax will be waived on their investment, on their profit that they make off the investment. So that's very attractive, and it's something that you can put forth. When you are going to funds, find out if they're ESV CLPs, and I think actually you could probably find a list of the ESV CLP funds in Australia. But again, just if your plans are Australian, that's obviously a given. But if you're considering investments abroad, for example, for manufacturing or whatever, there's that extra, I guess, advantage of doing most of your activities in Australia, because it might actually make your investment in your company more attractive to investors that have this scheme. So I'll hold off the specific criteria for a subsequent slide. David, I'm just conscious with the full screen presentation now, I can't really see if there's questions coming in. So by all means, please, stop me if there's any questions specific to the slides I'm on. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that.
Okay, so now let's get into a bit more of the specifics, particularly, I guess, from a life science investor, I'll talk about, but that's true sometimes if you have more like a digital health solution as well. So the first one that's absolutely key is there needs to be a market pool. And what we mean by that is, you know, you need to tell us, here's a problem, right? So it could be a specific cancer indication, especially a specific autoimmune disease indication. And there is a true market pool because there's a true market need, right? So that's more than just saying, okay, well, you know, obviously there could always be better drugs for cancer, but if you're telling us, okay, it's for triple negative breast cancer, it's not just that the marketed technologies are not doing what they, you know, ideally would, i.e. provide an efficacious treatment with safety parameters or as safe as they can be. You know, so you say, okay, well, there's a true lack from marketed technologies because they're efficacious, but they have a terrible safety profile, right? And most patients don't go on them until second or third line because they're just too hard to deal with. But you also need to understand, okay, well, what's in development, right? So I'm not just taking a snapshot of today on market, I'm thinking about, well, what's currently being trialed in clinical trials, and essentially say, okay, in this indication, we just don't see that marketed products in development will do the trick, and we believe our technology can do better, right? So that's absolutely key, and it flows right into how your technology is competitive. Well, you need to show us it's either leaps and bounds better in terms, you know, more generally, I guess, I'll stick to those two pillars. It's better in terms of safety because of animal trials you might have, from early, you know, potential clinical trials you might have, but, you know, mostly from a safety signals from animals, and similarly from efficacy, right? You just say, look, this is the gold standard models. Others have done this, including companies that are currently in development, and we just think ours is leaps and bounds, right? So you show us what the true kind of pipeline perspective, so kind of prospective and current, to really make the case on both the market pool, there's a need, and how's our technology is competitive. So that's the first part. Now, I guess what you need from thereafter is kind of the, I guess, more housekeeping items, which, you know, clear development path, which, you know, again, if you're doing a small molecule biologic modality, that's pretty clear cut already. So that's less of an area of concern for us. However, if it is a more novel modality, like cell therapy, for example, or, you know, some kind of gene therapy vector that's novel, etc. I mean, with every week that passes, there's more and more companies going through a path with the FDA, and I mean, it's more and more clear what you kind of need to submit with the FDA, or even here in Australia with the TGA to be allowed to do trials. But again, just give us a good sense that either with your tech transfer office or potentially regulatory consultants, you really know, you know, from, you know, preclinical animal to ID submission for a device or an authorization to do a clinical trial, you really have a grasp of the data package that you need to execute on the trials, both for phase 1 healthy volunteer or phase 1b patient study, and moving on down your regulatory path. So really just give us a good sense that you've traced the roadmap. And from a reimbursement strategy as well, right? It could be very well laid out already because there's similar products in market, you know, first line treatments for cancer. But if it becomes like a second line, third line, how will you get reimbursed, right? So it's okay to have your data package for to be allowed to do clinical trials, but during those clinical trials, you know, are you going to collect data to help through your reimbursement strategy? You know, basically to show the payers, which, you know, in the US are private insurers, here in Australia, you know, would be PBS. What do you know that these are institutions, organizations need to give you a favorable pricing on your drug, right? Do you need to show superior safety to a certain level? Do you need to show superior efficacy at a certain level? Or there's some, you know, you might have heard the term QALY, so the kind of quality of life a grading system that, you know, that payers use to determine the price that you will get. So, like, I'm not going to do a deep dive on reimbursement strategy, but again, this is the kind of thing that's key. More so if it's, again, a new area like a gene therapy, cell therapy, where a lot of these payment schemes are actually still being, you know, figured out, right? Like Novartis is considering if it's a one-time treatment for gene therapy. Well, you know, is it all upfront? Is it payment based on subsequent results that patients get if the treatment, the one-shot dose, keeps on being sustained in terms of efficacy in the future. So all these things, right? So again, it's very specific to the modality of treatment indication that you're going into. Medical device have their own quirks. But yeah, so I think the key here is really leverage the resources that you have, other entrepreneurs that you know of, maybe other professors, students in your department or at the hospital have kind of gone through that path. And, I think for an early stage company, our ecosystem is quite small in Australia. People are very nice. I mean, I haven't come across any kind of bad actors really in the 3.5 years I've been in this industry in Australia. People are open to having coffee and talking about these things, right? So you can get a lot of free advice, at least to trace the roadmap, and then the specifics that you need to build up an investment case, for investors to invest in you. And look, this is probably the trickiest one for an early stage company, right? Like we recognize that, if you're still at the hospital or you're still in your university lab, your founders, your inventors, your name on the patent, but we don't expect you to be, full-fledged, drug developers that can take, a molecule from the bench all the way through a phase 3 and FDA approval or TG approval. But it's good at this stage. We're not going to expect you to have a CEO or a CFO or kind of the operational people that are going to help you kind of raise money and or for future on at least and get this drug further down the regulatory path. But it's really important, at least at your stage, to have a good scientific advisory board. So at least the market pool and competitive technology pieces are really well vetted out, right? So it's not just kind of desktop research that validates this. It's you've reached out to key opinion leaders in the field, either researchers or physicians that are seeing patients or have worked in this area for quite some time, and kind of the fact that they're on your scientific advisory board, and obviously we can always find out what's their level of involvement. Have you kind of spoken to them once, or are they truly engaged with you and speaking frequently and helping you shape your strategy and your research? But if you have kind of key names that are well published, well read, and that are vetting for your technology and the indication you're going after, that speaks volume, right? It kind of those are people that in our diligence process when we're looking at investment that we're gonna talk to. But if we kind of realize that, oh my God, like these guys or gals are leaders in their field, then that really kind of helps us kind of vet out this piece in our investment diligence process. If you have line of sight with kind of experienced CEOs or experienced COOs or business development people, look, I'm throwing a whole bunch of names here, but those are kind of like usually the management team that's in place, to get a drug to phase 1 trials, for example. People that are experienced, if it's a biologic experience with manufacturing, they don't need to be full-time, but if you have kind of line of sight to consulting agreement with them subject to funds coming in, then we know you've actually reached out to your network and done the work, right, to build a team. So it's not going to only fall on us as a new investor coming in to kind of build that team from a standing start with you. Because look, it could be the greatest molecule in the world, but if you don't have the right people there to make those strategic decisions on all the various aspects that a particular modality, so if it's med device, it's one thing. If it's biologics, it's one thing. If it's small molecule, it's a whole different kind of set of expertise that you need to seek. It's harder for us to say, okay, we're going to build all that up from scratch, right? I mean, we have, and Kira is a good example of that, but it's just more difficult to take the risk of making an investment if we just don't have a line of sight of who are going to be people pushing this technology forward. And look, finally, this is, I guess, this right now it's kind of like a kind of Bloomberg terminal-like icon, but this can very much be a dollar sign. This is all well and good, but if your investors cannot see money within their fund time frame, I guess everything else goes out the window, right? So it could be the most, the most promising technology in the world, but there's still 20 years of it before you can realistically, list it on a public exchange to, start trading shares, or you need to, 20 years of research to convince an acquirer. Like, for example, BI requires an artificial heart. Like, has a very small list of potential acquirers, so medical device companies that operate in the cardiovascular space. Yeah, if you can make a case that we'll be able to sell it to one of these parties, or list it on a public exchange within our fund time frame, then it's going to be very hard for us to invest, right? Which is fine. That might be a case where there's MTP Connect grants, there's other sorts of non-dilutive funding that you can get to a stage where then you kind of do the first 5 years of a 15-year plan to exit. And then you kind of start fitting into that 10-year time frame for a VC investor to come on board. And it'll change, right? I mean, if some of you have been following the market, especially over the past 18 months, and the intense lens that's been put on healthcare. I mean, healthcare has always been important, but even more so now. You see companies getting to liquidity much more earlier, right? Listing on the NASDAQ in the US with just an idea. Sometimes it could just be a still discovery stage, or a single molecule that's ready for phase 1 trials. So they've just gotten their IND, for example, to run a trials in the US, and that's good enough, to list on the NASDAQ. Usually, if your platform of your research will be permissive to more products coming out, right, or your molecule will be able to go after multiple indications, right? So usually you'll see those stories have kind of great value potential in them, but the lead molecule, the lead technology could just be starting their clinical stage. So I guess what you need to do is do your research, find out when companies are listing for a particular indication, and just build up a case that yes, we believe that we can return money. And usually these companies with this many molecules list on the NASDAQ or some public exchange, maybe the SX, at this valuation, right? So if you guys come in with this much money now at this value, let's call it 10 million, but you have line of sight to $500 million exit for the company, and 10 years time or 7 years time, then that would meet kind of the returns that we'd expect for an investment like VC investment. Another check, David. Any questions, or should I just keep on?
I was just about to jump in. Yeah, we've got a few questions here. So the first one just relates to success rates and things like that in the company and startup world. So medical developments are typically very high risk, and I understand you do all this sort of analysis before you dive in, but what is the typical sort of failure or success rate that you see in VC invested companies? Not necessarily specific to One Ventures, just in general.
Listen, it's if I speak from a VC portfolio, I think let's say out of 10 companies I would invested for a particular fund, rule of thumb, people say, okay, 3 of them or 4 of them might just not go anywhere, right? They might just not, get proper safety, and the animal studies, the molecule's too toxic. We find that out, it falls over, right? That kind of scenario. Then you might have another 4 that do okay, that kind of just the molecule gets to a certain point, it gets picked up by a smaller pharma, or you just do kind of a licensing deal that doesn't give you that much money up front, but they'll do further development. There might be money down the road, but like it's not like kind of a gangbuster kind of immediate cash in your pockets right now. So there may be 4 which might return like just the money you invested, maybe with some like 3% rate or something like that. And then you might have 2 that we call fund returners, right? So so that 20%, let's say, of the companies that you invest in that are such successes that in our case, for example, through ownership of both of them, or potentially even a single one of them, would return us $170 million cash, not necessarily profit, but let's give us that money back, right? We've come in at a small round, or Series A at a $10 million valuation, and the company ends up being acquired for $1 billion, right? And obviously we don't have that many in Australia just yet, but we have some like Elastogen, Fibrotech. We have a few kind of success stories protagonists out of UQ, that were kind of sizable deals for the investors on those deals. Those were kind of fun returners. So look, don't quote me on this. Again, it varies by geography. It varies by indication. There's also a notion. I mean, when we do the analysis, there's some indications that are also more high risk, right? Where there's been more failure. Like I can think about neurodegeneration, for example, like multiple sclerosis, where you just know that there's just less likelihood of what we called phase transition success rate, which means that there's only a 10% chance, or there's a 30% chance of going from preclinical to phase 1, and then maybe a 20% chance of going from phase 1 to phase 2, and then it might drop down to 10% to go from phase 2 to phase 3, right? So we know that even if we do a transaction, so the company gets acquired or lists, earlier on in the regulatory, it might get acquired after phase 1, for example. We know that the value that the acquirer is going to put on the company will risk adjust for the likelihood of them getting into market, right? If it's a Sanofi or a Merck and they're basing their investment, i.e. their acquisition price, based on the likelihood that they'll be able to generate revenues and profit after an approval, they all risk adjust, right? So that PTSR notion is important. It's not like we expect you to do that full analysis, once you present an investment case to us, but those are the kinds of things that we do in Excel and model to justify not the amount of money that we're putting in, but to justify the value at which we're going in, right?
Yeah.
Because the value is representative of the risk that we perceive for an investment. So I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully that's
absolutely
gives you a sense of how we're thinking from the inside.
We've got another question here. It relates to TTO staff and engaging researchers essentially on the ground. So what would be your advice to technology transfer organization staff? How can we best support researchers to get to the investment ready stage? Can you share any example of best practice in that space?
Yeah, I think at the end of this deck, which by the way I'm happy to share, there's nothing confidential in here. To be honest, I think you can't summarize it better as a deliverable than having in the first instance a non-confidential deck that really tells the story on the kind of 6 pillars that we see here very well, right? And look, I think most tech transfer offices I have the privilege to interact with, most of them did pretty well. But yeah, it's just kind of everything that we just talked about so far. Doing that initial research with the researchers, well, in the first instance, like a researcher might not have, because of grant writing, thesis writing, paper writing, might not have the chance to do a kind of thorough deep dive on market pull for a particular oncology indication. But I think the tech transfer office might have done that work, and this is not kind of specific to the technology, it's just specific to the indication, which is just general knowledge, might have done it for somebody else. So I think there's huge time savings that can happen by leveraging kind of work that's been done on some of these aspects for other technologies, which are looking at potential spinouts, or they might have done that work even for licensing the technologies to pharma. But yeah, so helping the companies, the potential companies, but the researchers that are looking to spin out to really build a strong investment case on these pillars. And the deliverable is a deck. It doesn't need to be a long forward kind of Word document. We see so many opportunities. We don't have time to read it. So the slide deck is really the best delivery format. And then, but that's just going to get you the first meeting, right? That's going to give us like the first kind of half an hour, 45 minutes introduction, kind of understanding of the opportunity. You then need to be ready with the same deck that goes into more depth, that is confidential, where we are presenting, for example, non-published data. So that needs to be ready before you even start reaching out. We can't be scrambling to kind of do a more detailed confidential version of the deck. If you do get that second meeting with us, right, we'll do more work and then we'll call another maybe hour-long meeting where we'll dive deeper in the data, for example. And finally, the third piece, and again, it's all those same 6 categories, is having a data room ready, right? is having a data room where you'll have, potential unpublished manuscripts or even published article neatly organized in these categories. Because as we continue our deep dive, then we'll go deeper and deeper. We'll want to look at organized documentation, everything. We'll want to look at actually, I didn't touch on this on here, but I've talked about it in terms of the competitive technology, the IP. The IP registry, what's your current issued patents, the one that are pending, the one that's gone for just for worldwide application stage, because we do work closely with IP councils that are going to instruct us as to, okay, is the technology well protected, or are they infringing on any patents, that we can see in the literature. Yeah, so look, those are the kind of 3 key deliverables where I see the tech transfer harvesting adding value is non-confidential deck, more detailed confidential deck, and then a data room to back it all up, or kind of where I think there could be a lot of time save for researchers, and a lot of synergies within the tech transfer office, because as you do it for more and more companies, there's some stuff that's going to be translatable from one to the next. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully helpful to you as well, David. I know we've had that sort of discussion before, but yeah, that's kind
of. We did have one more question, but you actually answered it in that explanation. So feel free to continue with the presentation, and then we can revisit additional questions towards the end.
Great. And okay, yeah, and we're doing okay with, I guess, 20 minutes. So look, I just thought I'd give you a bit more kind of, step away from the general stuff and give you a bit more of a case study. And look, this is by no means a full deck, right? But as you can see here, it does give you a good sense of how you can present some of the information, and actually, as you send out a first email. And look, I totally agree that you might want to keep some dry powder, right? Kind of keep your customer wanting more and not give the full non-confidential deck from the get-go. So a single slide flyer here might be useful, but I'm going to use this to kind of give you a sense of the Bivacor story and try and relate it back to what we've talked about already. And just, this is the sort of things actually that we present to our investors to give them regular updates on a quarterly basis to see how the portfolio and the companies are doing. So look, so this is the market pool that we're talking about. So for the Bivacor case, it is quite simple to understand, right? So there's obviously a whole bunch of patients worldwide that are suffering from heart failure. Those number varies based on severity, but the key market and the key problem that Bivacor is addressing is that there are patients that are suffering for biventricular, so both ventricles of the heart are failing, so the muscles on both sides are starting to work properly, and it's to a stage where drugs won't help because the organ is just too severely diseased, and so basically the only options for those patients is a heart transplant, biological heart transplants. Well, those are very few and far between. There's more demand. There's more people that need a donor heart than are donor hearts available, and they're not all compatible, right? And there's severely high rejection rates, and those patients need to go on immunosuppressive medications. So heart failure has not been addressed properly, right? And obviously, a lot of it can be due with general health, but a lot of it is congenital and just can't be addressed. And the last piece is there are mechanical solutions to take a synthetic support as opposed to depending on a biological heart, but the devices right now are only on the left-hand side of the heart, right? They can only support the left-hand side of the heart. So there is no kind of total artificial heart solution, but one that's a very old technology. They look in the 2000s, and it's called Syncardia. So when Bivacor came to us, they kind of painted very clearly that picture for us, and looks like there's no drug out there that are doing the trick, or that will do the trick, because it's just too much of a systemic organ failure problem. It needs to be a mechanical replacement because biological hearts, there's not going to be all of a sudden a new source, and we're very far from printing with the cell printer, a totally functioning heart that can support an adult, let alone a child, let alone an adult. So we need to have a total artificial heart. And the technologies right now, depending on kind of like expendable sacs, they have a high failure rate. People have to go in to the hospital to get them replaced. So that made all sense to us, and the solution that Bivacor was presenting was quite simple. Is instead of having an expanding membrane, which is pretty prone to failure and wear and tear, this was using a rotor technology that spins between a magnet with no friction. So a device essentially that could last, over 10 years, and using actually technology that the LVAD, so the left ventricular assist device, we're already using. So it was a proven technology, but just with very clever engineering to make it so that a single rotor can actually do the function of two chambers. And they backed it up with data, and the key data was large animal trials. So in this particular instance, cows that need 20 liters, not 5 liters, but 20 liters of cardiac support. And those cows had been using the heart for over 30 days, were only euthanized because of ethics reason. So for us, we're like, okay, well, clear problem, clear solution, very easy data. I mean, in this case, it's pretty easy. It's only survival with no kind of clot or any kind of cardiovascular adverse events, and large animal that actually are, need a higher performance device than humans. So that's the basis on which we invested. And look, some of these pieces, we did do a bit of a market research, but we just knew that it was a huge market worldwide. The regulatory path was a bit less clear because there hasn't been that many total office that have made it to market. So that's clear risk that we outlined, but that we're willing to take on because we knew that that there was such a need. And then we made a list of companies that could acquire this, and we knew that if we got to compelling human data, we didn't make the investment thesis based on animal trials. We made the investment thesis based on human data, and the time we'll get there, that we could get the right exit. So look, I'm kind of summarizing here, and a bit more color on the reimbursement that was particular to artificial hearts is that Bivacor came with reimbursement consultant from the US, which is the biggest market, that actually told us that not only will the devices be fully reimbursed for both the device and the procedure, so the implant, and the US under current Medicare codes in the US, but that those codes were actually applicable to the human trials as well, right? So that de-risked our investment, because actually the devices and the implant we could actually claim to Medicare and didn't have to come out of the capital pool that the investors were putting forth to Bivacor. So so those are kind of key highlights that really got our attention and made this a compelling investment opportunity for us. So any questions on this one, David, that have come through, or should I just move to Kira?
Feel free to move on to the next case study, and then we can answer more questions.
Great. So as Daniel for Bivacor came out of QUT and actually started making this device in his garage with his dad, kind of the true kind of garage entrepreneur story. In Kira, we had two scientific founders. So Dr. Derek Hard, who unfortunately passed away in 2019, and his wife Georgina Clark. We both work in the same lab. Derek was a hematologist by training, but actually was looking really at graft versus host disease, especially in the context of stem cell implants after radiation therapy or chemotherapy to replenish the bone marrow and the production of red blood cells. So hence the hematology tie-in. But then saw an opportunity here for a drug that could actually have application not just for preventing the graft attacking the host, so suppressing the immune system in that context, but also for a whole other range of immune diseases or autoimmune diseases, where right now the only solution is broad-acting immunosuppressants, which have a whole host of safety issues, especially when used on a chronic basis. So they were presenting a much more targeted approach. So this again from the market pool perspective, well, that Humira and Remicade and all these other drugs are one of the highest selling drugs on the market. So we didn't need to be too convinced that we've had compelling animal data showing proof of concept in these indications that we'd have something here, which we did at the time that they came to us. But you know, from a solution perspective, we saw in here an antibody solution that wasn't broad acting, that was specific to dendritic cells, that was depleting, so didn't kind of have the same potential for broad immunosuppression and associated side effect profile that the current drugs had. So I guess it was a kind of a platform in a single molecule, so multi-indication molecule, which is nice, right? Because it kind of gave us flexibility. If we didn't see success in a particular animal model, what we did in the other, or a few others, then we could take the molecule forward in multiple clinical trials after a phase 1 study in healthy volunteers to show safety. So that's how we position the problem in the competitive positioning. We've put the exit here, but that's something I can touch on. So both Bivacor, not many kind of exit stories that you could point to for total artificial heart. You could put to a few acquisitions for the left support devices, but here we can see that recently, there's a transaction being done in the $2 billion range for molecules, for example, that antibody molecules that have an application in lupus, for example, and Pendion Immunology and their asset, that had cleared phase 1, kind of like Kira had potential, was shown to be safe in healthy volunteers, but then had the potential to go after multiple indications. Kind of the same story, valued at $2 billion. Again, from leading pharmaceutical companies. So this is the kind of thing that's okay. There's obviously an interest in this space, and this approach is what companies are looking for. So from the team aspect, and I'll just kind of tag team with Bivacor, but Bivacor is very much an earlier story. When we invested back in 2018, again earlier in the fund life, we made the investment in Kira in 2019, and this actually came with the interest of Dan Baker, was leaving Janssen, so Johnson & Johnson's pharmaceutical division, but had actually scouted the asset, for Janssen. So Janssen has an investment arm called JGDC, and they had brought in Dan as a VP of R&D for immunology to look at this particular asset to invest in. So the deal didn't go forward with Janssen, but Dan was retiring and was really looking forward to taking this technology as a CEO. So that came as a package deal, which, again, with Dan's not only his drug development expertise, but his network and his power to attract other team members, kind of significantly de-risked the team aspect. And for example, we were able to bring in Mike Grissinger. Mike is not a scientist, but he was in business development, right? So has great expertise and doing transactions for pharmaceutical assets, which is obviously important to us because we need to find a path to liquidity, to get cash from this molecule. So Mike joined as executive chair on the board of directors, and has been a great asset to the company. And look, I just put this kind of the investment terms here. So as you can see here, we put from Fund 3, we committed $10 million to the round, which was a total of 20. And with that kind of amount, we knew we could get multiple preclinical animals and build up the data package in this way, do all the requirements that we needed to get to an innovative new drug or a TGA approved clinical trial here in Australia. And that we actually have enough money with 20 million to get through phase 1. So as you kind of just broke down the budget, and actually that's another place, obviously, as we talked about, that the tech transfer offices can help you, is what's the amount of cash that you need to get to significant milestones, and a few of them, right? Not just relying on one, for example, getting good preclinical data, but hopefully getting to a phase 1. Which at phase 1, that actually, based on deals, you can actually get money back to your investors potentially at this stage. But then, they knew that if we put 10, we'd have potentially another 10 on reserve to go into a Series B, right? So a subsequent round, and push the molecule further into a phase 2 trial, and then give us another shot on goal, another milestone to transact upon, right? So that was kind of the key in getting to those numbers. And we had a co-investment from IP Group, which is actually another investor that's affiliated to the Group of 8 here in Australia, the Group of 8 universities. And that was actually IP Group's largest investment, but they came along with us. Queensland's Business Development Fund, which is less relevant to you, but if the company is registered and in Queensland, even though a lot of the staff might be in Australia in New South Wales, the QBDF can actually invest money as well, and that's been great support to kind of get that extra bit of cash into the company. So this is kind of the story, I guess, more from a biopharma perspective. I don't know if there's any questions on this slide, David.
Yeah, we just had a question as it relates to Bivacor.
Yes.
So did you go as far in your due diligence as to actually validate the opportunity with potential acquirers? And I guess, leading on from that, what sort of validation would you expect from founders that are approaching you?
Yeah, I actually joined in May, and the investment was of 2018, and the investment was done early on. So I have less visibility on what the full diligence was, but I believe we did reach out to our network at Medtronic, who had invested in hardware, which was an LVAD, so electrical assist device out of Australia, and to get a sense of where they would invest. And it kind of validated what we had seen actually from previous transactions, with for them, the key trigger was at least early stage, it could be a small scale trial of 5 patients, but they need to see data in patients. So when we built up an investment case, we try to lay out a budget that would guarantee us, gives a really good chance of getting to human data to be able to transact to a Medtronic. And then I don't believe we reached out to other companies, but at least we had that as a proxy for what other companies might be looking for, well, like Boston Scientific or Abbott or others operating in the cardiovascular space. And I guess the other key thing too is we actually went to that which might be more accessible in the hospital setting is if you know of treating physicians that are, if they're published on top of that, it's even better. So MD, PhDs that are both treating patients and publishing, as I said earlier on, and they're part of the scientific advisory board, and we can reach out to them, which Bivacor had. That Chris Hayward, which is here at the Victor Chang Institute, affiliate to St. Vincent's, it was implanting LVAD devices and is fully cognizant of the needs of his patients and where the current lack of performance are and the current technologies. Yeah, so getting that dual kind of commercial lens and clinician lens that also is publishing research on the implant field was really kind of give us great confidence. And I should add to Bivacor, Daniel actually take the step, and I'm not expecting all researchers to do that, but he actually took the step of moving from Australia and going to the Texas Heart Institute in Houston, Texas, which is the hospital center that has pioneered all ventricular or mechanical circulatory support devices, and established its home base there for a while. And those clinicians and those researchers helped shape the Bivacor device where it is today. So Paul, our partner, actually got to go and visit the center there for both a research perspective, also seeing competing devices that are actually in the ward, in the cardiology ward, and then hearing those physicians are treating patients and telling him, hey, we need a Bivacor because these devices are just not doing the trick. They're huge controllers. They're making awful noise. They're preventing patients from actually doing their day-to-day activities. Yeah, it's I think that kind of clinician aspect within the hospital setting is a really good base that you as researchers can build, or even tech transfer offices can build, if you don't necessarily have those commercial connections. And sure enough, you might actually get those commercial connections to the companies via those individuals because they've worked on devices, they've done talks for them, gone to conferences. So it's a really good, I guess, pipeline through which to build your network. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just conscious of time, but we do have one more quick question. It just relates to the slide deck you discussed earlier. How many slides would you expect to see in that initial slide deck to cover those 6 areas? Are there any templates available, things like that?
Yeah, look, I actually stole that one from one of our partners at Anne-Marie, who presented another talk recently. And I think this sort of template is really good. I actually, let me look, David. I could see if I could find something in my resources that I've saved that's a template and not a deck that I like from companies I've looked at, because obviously I can't share those. But I think this general outline here, which you'll get when I share the deck, is a good thing to go on. Like this hits on all the key aspects, but keep in mind this would be for the non-confidential deck I talked about. I would expect more from a confidential deck once we get under CDA and we move on to deeper in diligence, but definitely from a non-confidential deck, I think a 10 slider, no more than 20 for sure, that hits on the kind of key aspects I've harped on about in the talk today, would be a good way of addressing it. And look, I'm sure Westmead or so the tech transfer office would have some good resources as well. But I think this is a good outline. I'll say if I can find out more. I know Silicon Valley Bank, which is a tech-specific bank in the US, but does a lot of healthcare, is a good one to look at or subscribe to their newsletter, because I know that sometimes they'll put out templates for investors pitching. I'll see if I can find the link on that one.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks heaps, Gabriel. So we might have to leave it there.
Sure.
I might just do a bit of a sign off, just so people are aware that if they want to explore this content a little bit more, that they have their relevant commercialization team members at their institutions. So if you don't know them already, absolutely go to the Westmead Research Hub website, so westmead.org.au, and find your relevant representative there. So I'd just like to thank everyone for attending, and thank Gabriel again for presenting today. This is the final of our series, and we look forward to implementing something again next year as well. But we have our recordings available, and this one will also be available too, again, on our website under Events and Commercialization Seminar Series 2021. So thank you all again for attending, and very much appreciate your time. Take care, everyone.